Photoshop has long provided tonal tools that let you brush in brightness and saturation variations. There's a dodge tool for selectively brightening the image, a burn tool for selectively darkening it, and a sponge tool that lets you add or reduce saturation. They're convenient tools and great for masking, but for day-to-day image editing, things have gotten a lot better in Photoshop CS4. Let's start with the dodge tool. I'm going to use it to brighten the shaded regions of these actors' faces. Let's start with her face because it's more in the midtones. That is to say, the middle brightness values. And notice up here in the options bar that there's a new checkbox, Protect Tones, that's turned on by default. I'm going to turn it off so that we can see how the dodge tool used to behave inside Photoshop CS3 and earlier. If I paint over her face, you can see that we do a nice job of brightening it, but we go too far, and we end up bringing out some pretty nasty details. For example, if I zoom in on the eye here, we've got a lot of noise going on and too much contrast as well. All right, I'm going to go ahead and zoom back out. And let's go ahead and retry that modification with Protect Tones turned on, as it is by default in CS4. And notice now if I paint over her face, we're retaining the saturation values, and we're also retaining the natural variations between brightness values. In other words, it does a much better job than it did before. It's even better in shaded regions, heavily shaded regions like the side of this man's face here. This area is well into the shadows, which are the darkest brightness values. In the old days, if I turned off Protect Tones and switched range to shadows, we can see that the dodge tool didn't do such a good job in shadow regions. I'll go ahead and undo that modification and turn Protect Tones back on. Now notice inside of Photoshop CS4, it does a terrific job. It does such a good job, in fact, that I can paint over these regions multiple times without getting those halos that we used to get in CS3 and earlier. In addition to the shadow details, which were too dark, we have highlight details that are too bright, and we're going to temper those using the burn tool. Again, the burn tool has been dramatically improved in CS4. Let's go ahead and take a look at the way it used to work in CS3. I'm going to switch over to highlights so that we're darkening the lightest colors inside the image, and I'm going to turn off Protect Tones so we can see the old behavior. And notice what we used to do is really darken those highlights quite a bit, send them into sort of a gray zone. I'll go ahead and undo that modification and turn on the Protect Tones feature and paint again. And you can see that it does a remarkably better job. Now, I feel like I've still gone a little bit too far with this modification, so I'll undo it and I'll reduce the exposure value to something like 30% and try again. And I might also apply a similar modification to the woman's face here in the background. Finally, we've got the sponge tool. And you can best see the difference with the sponge tool when it's set to saturate in order to increase the saturation or intensity of the colors. I'm going to turn off the vibrance checkbox so we can see how it used to behave. And I'll paint over this woman's face in the background. And you can see how it's making her face this very bright shade of orange. Let's go ahead and undo that, since it's an unnatural effect. And I'll turn on Vibrance, which is a more selective control, as we'll see. And I'll paint over her face again. Even at a very high setting, a flow of 50%, we end up getting a much more natural effect. It's still not exactly what I want, however, so I'll undo that modification. And I'll reduce the flow value just by pressing the 3 key, which will change it to 30%. And now I'll paint over her face again. Then I'll reduce the value to 20% by pressing the 2 key, and I'll paint over his face in order to increase the vibrance of the colors a little bit here as well. And just to give you a sense of what kinds of modifications we've been able to invoke here, I'll go ahead and revert the image to its original appearance by choosing the Revert command. So this is the before version of the image, and this is the after version, thanks to the more expertly rendered toning tools inside Photoshop CS4. One more thing I want to show you about working with brushes. And this is a new trick inside CS4. If you want to change the size of a brush, and this goes for any of the painting or editing tools, you can Alt, right-click, and drag. And notice you see a preview of that brush on the fly. On the Macintosh side of things, that would be Command-Control drag. If you want to change the hardness of a brush, you Shift-Alt-Right drag on the PC, as I'm doing here, and you can see a preview once again on the fly. On the Macintosh side of things, that's Control-Option drag. We'll wrap things up with a look at an enhancement made to the Replace Color command, which allows you to selectively modify colors inside of an image. I'm going to go ahead and identify a color here inside this gentleman's cheek just by clicking on it with this eyedropper cursor. And then I'm going to brighten the color significantly using this lightness value. And notice that we get a fair amount of artifacting along the edge. Notice these posterized edges that are going on here, as well as the weird transitions that we're seeing inside of the man's face. If I turn on the Localize Color checkbox, however, it dramatically smooths out those transitions. Now, I've gone too far, so I'm going to take this value down to something like +5, let's say. And then I'll click the OK button in order to accept that result. And now, once again, just to give you a sense of the progress we've made here, I'm going to go ahead and revert the image to its original appearance. This is before, and this is after, thanks to the improved toning tools in Photoshop CS4.